Welcome to the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad. I'm your host, Chris Finn, and I'm excited today. We have a little detour from the usual guys. We have, but actually very applicable to everything that we do here at Par for Success. And we have with us Deven Morgan. He is a very prominent figure in the youth baseball world. He's the director of youth baseball and founder of the Driveline Academy at Driveline Baseball. And we'd be here for another about 45 minutes if I read you his entire background. Let's just say he's super smart, and he has developed amazing ways to train youth baseball players intelligently using science the same way that we obviously advocate on the golf side. So, Deven, welcome, man. It's an honor to have you.
Yeah, Chris, man, thanks for being here. That was far too kind of an intro. Just know that personally, my anxiety is now up at an 11, and I'm
no pressure. You must perform.
I'm never going to live up to all those platitudes. I don't know, man. You know, I have been really, really privileged over the last 15 years to be able to kind of go head over heels about youth baseball, and specifically over these last 7 years at Driveline. Like, being able to kind of make youth baseball my job is a real privilege, and it affords me the opportunity to like go super in depth on conversations like this. So I'm happy to be here, man.
Yeah, man. So talk a little bit just for, I think, for the average golfer out there. Now, myself, I have an 11-year-old. He's in Little League. A lot of junior golfers play baseball and as well as other sports. Yeah. So, but for those that may not be familiar with Driveline in the baseball world, talk a little bit just kind of how it started, where you guys came from, the philosophy behind it, and the mission, and kind of get us up to speed with today at this point.
Sure. So the abbreviated kind of history here is Kyle Bodie founded the company in 2009 here in the Seattle area, and we've gone through a variety of iterations since then in terms of facility space. I mean, I think the first building was above like a karate dojo, and now we have the luxury of having around 43,000 square feet here in Washington. We have another facility that we opened our second location in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we just opened our third location in Tampa, Florida, within about the last year or so.
That's awesome.
And and I think if you drill all the way down to it, Driveline is very much a data-driven player development company, and that's kind of the simple one-sentence summation of what we're trying to do and why we do it. The depth there, though, I think really, revolves around the men and women of the company. We just try to do the thing that we know works. And I think, at least in baseball, and I think there's probably a golf parallel here, right? We don't really have a dogmatic attachment to like, this is what we used to do, therefore this is always the thing that we are going to do, right? Mm-hmm. We try to be pretty relentless about leveraging technology and data and science and research, real good peer-reviewed research with significant enough sample size to know that like...
Wait, 10 people isn't enough. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, and sometimes 10 people is like decent signal. One of the things that we developed in the last year or so was we came up with a new overload training bat for youth players. Mm-hmm. Previous, the one that we had been using in partnership with the good friends over at AxeBat, was developed back in like 2017, 2018, and it was a two-bat solution. Mm-hmm. One of those bats had the majority of the weight on the end of the barrel, mm-hmm. Which increases swing weight, or otherwise known as moment of inertia, if you want to go down the physics pathway.
Golf, we call it swing weight, for the average golfer listening.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had another one that had more of the weight closer into the hands, so reducing MOI or swing weight while still having, it still weighs more, but it's easier to manipulate because the weight is distributed closer to the center of the axis of rotation.
Right.
And there were a couple things that I had observed. One is that trying to have parents understand how to execute that system for their kids inherently gets a little bit more complex because you're just trying to deal with two different variables. Right. How do we make sure we get enough swings with the green bat, the one that has the weight by the end, versus the red bat, the weight in by the hands? Mm-hmm. And then additionally, in youth baseball, at least, there's a bunch of different kind of competition bat configurations. We talk a lot in the baseball side about drop. And drop, typically what we mean is the weight of the bat relative to its length.
I learned all about this in buying my son's Little League. Way more complicated today than it was when I played.
Super complicated. Super complicated.
I remember showing up, there were like 3 bats. Like the team had 3 bats, and if you were real lucky and one of the kids on your team like dad had some money, you might have a fourth bat that was like didn't have a dent in it. That was kind of, now I mean, you got to show up with your own helmet, you got to show up with your own bat, you got to show, I mean, it was crazy different today than it used to be.
Yeah, and baseball is already one of these games where it's not like basketball, right? Like I can't just grab a ball and go to the park.
Right.
I need all this gear, and look, we could spend a whole hour talking about like the downstream economic effects of who's able to participate because of this like high ask in terms of game stuff.
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. So like a 30 drop 10 is a 30-inch 20-ounce bat. And kids, because they are not small adults, trademark on that phrase, kids are not small adults, they'll go through like drop 12s to drop 10s to drop 8s to drop 5s sometimes. And inevitably, when they get to high school, they have to swing what's called a BB core bat. Batted ball coefficient of restitution is what BB core stands for. And that bat has to be, by rule, 3 ounces less than it is long. And in youth baseball, there isn't a lot of stimulus or signal to incentivize a kid to move away from the bat that is performing well for them in the current term. So you could spend your entire youth baseball career swinging the lightest bat that you possibly could, which enables you to not develop some of the rotational power and strength that allow you to swing a heavier bat at the same or better speed. Right. But then the new rule changes, and it goes, here's a BB core bat.
Right.
Hope you like it.
Good luck.
And that configuration is really tough. I think for parents, it makes it really challenging. Like, what's the right bat, right? Because
and so for golfers, I mean, this is basically like your kid swinging a 40-gram shaft all the way through junior golf, and then all of a sudden they show up at high school and they have to all of a sudden swing an 80-gram shaft.
It's the exact same thing. So we decided to kind of simplify things and do two things. One, create like a one-bat solution for overspeed training. But two, leverage the database that we had of game bats to be able to go like, all right, it's not necessarily about the drop. It's more about swing weight. Mm-hmm. So we had the luxury at Driveline, because we have a whole lot of data, is we had somewhere north of like 400 youth game bats in our bat fitting database. Okay. And I know, I probably have a lot of questions for you about golf bat fitting, or golf club fitting, because I think you guys have a far more sophisticated process there than what we execute on the baseball side, right? Yeah. Like I've seen stuff in baseball where it's like, well, if your kid is like this tall and their arm is this long, you should probably go with like this length and weight of bat. Yeah. And it's like, the odds that that's actually accurate are very, 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 very low.
Exactly.
So basically what we did is we actually looked at the swing weights of, almost somewhere around 400 bats, and then went like, okay, if this is what these values are, then the actual swing weight MOI that we want for the overload bat that we're developing should be Y if we want that to be 20% heavier. If you look at some of the peer-reviewed research studies on bat speed training, generally the golden place you want to be is about 20% overload. Yep. And not only did we kind of like see some inefficiency and some opportunity there, and basically to be able to develop a better tool for kids, but the other thing is that there are a lot of competing products in the marketplace that don't revolve around that, and they are overly heavy, because the thought sometimes is like, well, if some is good and more is better and most is best, then it's like, well, yeah, why don't I have my 11-year-old swing a 40-ounce bat? Yeah, they're going to get 20 ounces stronger than if they're swinging a 30-ounce bat, right?
Just like in golf, if you can swing a golf club on a Bosu ball, like might as well. I mean, it'll be even easier on stable ground, right? It's not like it trains different motor patterns or anything like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So to come all the way back to the small sample size thing, we did like a small sample study of one of the competitor bats that is what I would say is overly heavy.
Yeah.
And we did that in our biomech lab, and we're able to kind of evaluate the way that the swing metrics change relative to implement. Mm-hmm. And what we saw, I love that we're just getting like fully in the weeds on highly technical stuff to start.
Everyone knows I'm a geek, and so this is expected, and these are my favorite episodes.
Okay, good. Then your audience is my type of people. And what we saw was that these kids were swinging kind of a competitor bat that is over what I would say is too heavy most of the time for most kids. Yep. is you saw an excessively positive attack angle. And basically the conclusion that we made, this is before we developed the system for computerized computer vision for bat tracking, which is a separate conversation. But what we saw is that like they just lose the barrel early. They kind of
So they
start
end
the
up hitting
swing,
up
they
on it,
lose the
which in
barrel
golf.
early,
So we have an obviously angle of attack,
and then
in
you
golf
have to
as
kind
well,
of get
too.
out of that hole.
Yeah. So what is like
Yeah,
an
exactly. So you
ideal
end up,
angle of attack?
well, it's always going to be relative to the pitch,
Okay.
right? It's always going to be relative to the pitch, and I think that's the most significant variable. The difference between golf and baseball is the fact that you guys have the luxury.
Your
of the
ball's
ball doesn't
moving.
move.
Yeah. Yours moves.
Yeah. And as my dog Griffey decides to join me, and as you see kind of more at the professional level, more at the collegiate level, more at the high school level, and that's kind of working its way downhill in the youth level, a lot of kids understand that like a nicely backspun four-seam fastball at the top end of the zone is a hard pitch to get to because you have to have a really flat attack angle to be able to hit that thing flush. Right. Generally, I would say that an attack angle of somewhere like, I could look at the MLB stuff. I would say for kids, somewhere between like 15 to 20 is ideal. And the reason there is that like that is probably more so than I know it's more so than it is at the professional and the collegiate level. But when you start to think about the environment of youth baseball, those kids don't throw that hard because they're kids, and kids are not small adults.
Right.
So as you see lower pitch velocity, you see more descent angle of the incoming pitch.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So for kids, I think it makes sense for them to have a correspondingly positive attack angle that might be more so than what they need at the high school, collegiate, professional level, right. Because the thing that we're trying to optimize for is flush contact. And as much as I'd like to like clap myself on the back for getting into the weeds about this stuff, the fact of the matter is that like Ted Williams figured this out 70 years ago, 60 years ago, when he wrote The Science of Hitting, right? Ted was already kind of a mind that like if the descent angle is here, the attack angle should be here, and you want to meet it.
Right.
And the funny thing is that in the kind of the democratized marketplace of thought, you had guys like Ted Williams who were talking about positive attack angle to meet the descent angle of the incoming pitch, but you also had a ton of big leaguers talking about swinging down.
Yeah. So we had the same thing in golf. You have big drive partly because of the technology and the equipment, but historically people would say you hit down on a driver. Obviously the driver's teed up, but it's very well documented at this point. Particularly, we work with all the world long drive guys, the fastest guys in the world, and they hit up on the ball 8 degrees, as opposed to hitting down on the ball 2 or 3. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. So it's it's an interesting thing, and I think the baseball environment about training and development right now you could easy to kind of just write it off and say like, well, it's very fractured, right? It's very fractured. Nobody agrees on anything. Big leaguers think one thing. The nerds, guys like me, think a different thing. But I think the reality is that like that same, I don't want to say cognitive dissonance. I'd say that lack of agreement.
Yeah. That
lack of agreement existed in Ted Williams' time. And that guy was arguably the top 1 or 2 hitter of all time. Yeah. So if Ted Williams has to deal with the fact that like there's a wonderful, perfect example of this. There's a wonderful Sports Illustrated article that I think you can still find in their archives. It's Ted Williams, George Brett, Don Mattingly, and I think Wade Boggs talking hitting at a table.
Oh, wow.
And you have guys like George Brett who came up under Charlie Lau, right? Charlie Lau was like gets a lot of the credit for kind of like getting George Brett to the place that he got to in terms of being one of the best hitters of all time, Hall of Famer, et cetera, et cetera. Charlie Lau taught like a very kind of exaggerated forward move about getting a lot of weight on the front side to the point that there's almost none on the backside. And there's this wonderful conversation where it's like you listen to, and also was a little bit of like down with the path. So to know that like those 3 or 4 guys, I can't remember if it was all 3 or 4 of those guys, but all those guys are having that conversation and they can't get in agreement. The fact that like we just have more information right now, but there's still some people that are like would differ in terms of the thing that I just said about attack angle, right? Yeah. They're going to say that like, well, I'm still thinking about swinging down. And to be honest, I'm not sure that they're necessarily wrong, but there's a difference between the approach that I'm kind of advocating for, and I'm telling a hitter in terms of what I want them to focus on and what the actual result of that is,
Yeah,
right? Like
feeling
those
real.
two
Yeah.
things, those things, and and again, when we talk about this difference between feel and real, oftentimes you'll see people that are like, well, you have to frame it that way because you never played at the professional level, and it's like, yeah, 100%. You can pick the worst, worst big leaguer of all time, and that person is still a space alien compared to normal people like me.
Yeah.
Like they got to a side of the mountaintop that like regular people don't get to. So it's not necessarily that I'm trying to say, or that we are trying to say that that person is wrong. It's just that I think that there is, number one, if I'm training kids like like their competitive environment is professional baseball and they're kids, that's not a great fit, right? And I think everybody would agree with that. You can start to roll downhill a little bit and go like, well, why do big leaguers think that they need to swing down? Okay, well, what's the competitive environment of professional baseball? Guys that throw the hardest in the world generally. What are those balls are going to do less of? They're going to have less descent angle because of velocity. So it could be that for a professional hitter, you have to have the swing thought of stay on top or swing down because you can't afford yourself to get too uppercutty through it.
Right.
But again, that's just relative to the competition environment. That's not what 11-year-old minors or 12-year-old like little league majors baseball looks like. I can assure you those two things are
I
not
was
the
just
same.
at my son's 11-year-old baseball game last night. There was a negative descent angle on every pitch coming in, and thankfully, because one of them hit him in his head,
Right?
so that was good. There was no
Yeah.
concussion.
Yeah, so it's I think at the end of the day, we're just trying to give, I think, the best information that we can and the most clear information that we can to the athletes that we work with. And I think again, you can work further down the runway about some of the other stuff that we focus on that I think there is a parallel to in golf, which is just that like swing speed is really important. It is almost the most important if you look at like production at the professional level relative to average and peak bat speeds. It's just the guys that are the best in the world generally swing the fastest. I think we inherently understand that that same thing is true in youth baseball, but because we're still in this phase of things where there's like highly irregular amounts of physiological growth, you can have 11-year-olds that present as like biological 14s. Those kids crush not necessarily because they're 14, but because they have an advanced physiology that allows them to move the bat faster.
Correct. Yep.
So, for us, it kind of just seems like there's a fairly significant opportunity to change what the future looks like if we don't put a kid behind the curve of skill development for something that is, you can improve it, right? I mean, again, this is just, if you start to look at the science and the research, the American Association of Pediatricians has been on record since I want to say 2016 or 2015 that age-appropriate strength and resistance training is safe for kids.
100%.
Again, very different than the way that we grew up. Specifically in the culture of baseball, we were told that you shouldn't lift weights because lifting weights is going to make you move slow.
Oh, same thing as golf.
Right.
They still say that.
I would just
Some parents still believe
I would
that in
just
golf. Yeah.
there's a famous picture. I want to see if I can pull it up right now. There's a famous picture of Aroldis Chapman playing cards, and he's sitting at a table, and you can see how gigantic his biceps are. You can also just Google Tyler O'Neill. Tyler O'Neill is a professional baseball player. He's a Canadian. His dad was Mr. Canada. He was a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Tyler O'Neill is just stupid jacked.
Yeah.
And weirdly is still able to move really well and move really fast.
Ever watch the gymnastics at the Olympics?
Exactly. I think there might have been an era in baseball where if you think about the difference between speed and power, or I'm sorry, think about the difference between like skill and power. I think you could say that there was a period of time where guys were more skilled than they had power at the professional level. And I think that the best evidence of that is like the average fastball rate. Like the average fastball has gone up and up and up and up over the course of the last 20 years.
Kind of just like club head speed in golf. Yeah.
Right. Which I think proves a couple points. Number one, it's a trainable tool.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that we've seen in golf that I think you guys are seeing in baseball as well is we're understanding the science of speed and how to train it and how to train that skill. Obviously, with force plates, with exercise physiology, with all of the training mechanisms and research that's coming out, like stuff that you guys are doing. I mean, it's not surprising that all those numbers are going up, right?
Yeah, and I think there is a parallel conversation to be had about that, about the way that it's trained and the way that workload is monitored and the whole injury rate thing. I mean, that's a whole other thing that I don't know if there's an epidemic of stress injuries in the back in youth golf because that is
Yep.
that can be a thing. I mean, we just call it spondy as like an offhand. It's like spondylitis or something like that.
Spondylolisthesis.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Just like I said it.
That one.
That can be a thing in terms of just like, but that's a volume problem, right?
Yep. Well, that's most injury risk stuff, particularly with kids. I mean, with anybody, but particularly with kids, is capacity surpassing what the system's able to handle from a resilience standpoint.
Right, and my big. If you called it a religious crusade, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. My big thing right now is trying to sound the alarm and force some action about overuse, specifically in youth baseball and specifically on the pitching side.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the stress injuries that you can accumulate both in golf or in baseball or any other type of rotational sport where you're having an excessive amount of load, that's all there. The stuff that is really alarming to me, and I think unfortunately it's only gotten worse, is the stuff about overuse on the pitching side. Yeah. And basically the unfortunate reality is that like the game at the youth baseball level kind of compels overuse.
Yeah, 100%.
And absent a rule set that allows for that to be controlled, which we do not have, I think you're only seeing the system that we have right now is perfectly designed to get the results that we're getting. That's an old W. Edwards Deming quote. In the system, like the output that we're getting is when MLB published the pitching injury report at the tail end of 2024, they had some data from the Andrews Institute, who most recently their percentage of UCL repairs that they attributed to the youth population in their facility was over 50%. I think it peaked at around 60, hovering around like 50 or 55%. And that shouldn't be a thing. Mm-hmm. That should not be a thing. It's abhorrent. I do think that it's child abuse, but not only, number one, it's a result of the lack of system that we have, and number two, it's preventable. It's preventable, but right now it affects everybody, not only the kids that throw harder for their age because they're biologically advanced or they're stronger, or the kids that throw slow. All of them can get overused. But anyways, this is a little bit far afield.
But is that so? What we see, like what we're seeing in the golf space for juniors, is by the time they get to the big tour, by 18, let's say 20, 22, right? They've essentially at this point already played what in the old days was an entire professional career. I mean, juniors are. I know with travel baseball, same thing. They're traveling all over the country. Parents are dropping tens of thousands of dollars a year. They're playing year round. So I think there is one thing of an increased injury rate in the tour level is that they've already played an entire professional career by the time they get there. I think the other thing that we see in the juniors, I'd be curious if you see this in the baseball space, the skill of and the science behind training speed, obviously, particularly with the accessibility of force plates in the last 5 years, has skyrocketed. Like our juniors, the average club head speed is up at least 5%. It's just like how to train it better. The technique and the ability to create technical speed, because obviously you can create speed from technical acuity, and then there's the mobility, range of motion, and then there's the strength underlying the power explosiveness, right? So I think what I see in the golf side, I'd be curious if you see this on baseball, is kids are inherently pretty mobile. They are all taking lessons, so they're very technically, their technical acumen is extremely high, so they're optimized in terms of speed and velocity there. And then there's speed training and nervous system elastic. Like they're very elastic naturally. What they lack is the strength or the ability, quote unquote, brakes, or I use armor. Like how thick your armor is when you go into battle, that's how many bullets you can take. The kids they're going out to battle in t-shirts. And then we're wondering why there's a 60% UCL injury rate, right? I'm wondering, parents are wondering why their 10-year-olds are walking in and seeing my physios for back pain as 10-year-old golfers. Is that kind of what you're seeing? Is that these other areas are outpacing just biologically where these kids are able, either if they're not even doing any strength training, or they just don't have the hormones or ability to develop the strength? Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's exactly that. But I think the thing that's interesting to consider is like why, right? Like because I think ultimately, if you consider that as an outcome, I think it boils down to parents who have a good intention to start with, right? Their intention is, my kid enjoys this activity. My kid is going to enjoy it more if they perform better. Therefore, I have disposable income and I have time, so I can afford them the opportunity to improve these things. It's interesting, though, that we do kind of front load a lot of the sport specificity instead of the athletic engine that kind of is the base layer of all that sport specific skill.
Yeah.
Right? Like the thing that's underneath that is athleticism. And again, athleticism is a thing that can be improved. And the crazy thing is that like the same concept generally applies in both directions, right? Yep. The way that we train, whether that's thrown ball velocity improvement or bat speed improvement, that takes advantage of the same kind of periodization concepts as the strength training stuff. Periodization meaning that you're going to introduce some low-level stimulus, some medium-level stimulus, some higher-level stimulus, and then you're going to kind of regress back down. When you regress back down, you afford the opportunity for the athlete to recover, get into that super compensation phase, and then we're kind of like we're raising the floor by raising the ceiling.
Right.
That same basic concept is the way that all of this works. And to me, I would hazard a guess that the reason why we overload on the sport-specific stuff and we underload on the athletic development stuff is because one of those two things is a lot more. It's a lot easier to see the improvement.
It's sexier,
right?
Yeah, immediate gratification.
Right. It makes sense that you're going to go like, well, I want my kids' thrown ball velocity to go up by 5 miles an hour this year. Well, me too. And my kid throws 90, right? Like yeah. me too. But the way that we train it at Driveline is that like you can't kind of have one without the other, right? Like I don't know. I'm sure that there's some sort of like.
I'd love for you to dive into how you guys approach the athletic development side of it and how that kind of coincides and then integrates with the skill acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, it just has to. It has to include everything. You can't and I think the perfect example of this is kind of like it's the things that we do offer in terms of training and what we don't offer. You can't do a pitching lesson at Driveline Baseball. You can't. I'm not going to sell you that product. I don't want to sell you that product. You can do an assessment, right? You can come in and we can have you throw, say, 8 to 12 bullets that are representative of what you look like at a competitive level of intent. And we can look at the report. We can look at your biomechanics. We can look at the force plate data to figure out how you produce force. We can look at the angular velocity of all the type of stuff of how you move, and then kind of score it and grade it and say, here's what you need to improve on. This stuff is pretty good. So the training that you should do should revolve around X, Y, and Z. Right. But the reason that we approach it that way is because that report is a holistic report, right? It looks, and to be honest, it actually, if it leans anything, it leans more toward movement and away from outcome. If you understand what I'm saying.
100%.
So if you think about,
explain that for listeners. I mean, I'm 100% on the same page, but for listeners, how would you explain that, like to my 11-year-old son listening right now?
So if I was going to take my kid to a pitching lesson right now, I think the best case outcome that I would get from that single session is a carrot that leads toward another session, right?
Yep.
You do this wrong, and this wrong.
Yep.
As if those things are like boxes that can be checked.
Right.
And in addition, depending on the instructor, the other thing that kind of might be in the back of their mind is command, right? Now, for the third time, kids are not small adults. In basically every other facet of their lives, kids have both a coordination and a proprioceptive deficit compared to adults. Proprioception basically is a fancy $5 word to talk about how accurate you are at locating your body in space. Highly critical for golf, even more so for baseball, because the proprioceptive aspect of things is the thing that is going to determine, again, whether you have good bat-to-ball skills, right? Whether you can command the zone. Both of those things kind of are informed by your proprioceptive development. And there's also this thing called the speed-to-accuracy trade-off, the Sato principle, if you will. And the way that the Sato principle works is sometimes as you increase the rate of speed, you get decreases to accuracy. So kind of the question becomes like, well, how fast can you move without making like accuracy sacrifices in the lead you be less competitive? Right. So to circle all the way back to kind of like the conventional lesson model, it's easier to make a kid move slower and command better.
Right.
Like that is a deliverable that I can achieve relatively easily, because we're just kind of like, we're constraining the degrees of freedom.
Yep.
And I think, you said you saw 11-year-old baseball the other night, right?
Oh, yeah.
How many of these kids on that field have very pushy, like almost dart throwy arm action?
Many.
A decent chunk, right?
Yeah.
I think the way to kind of think about that is it's a result of environment. If the environment that you have cultivates accuracy at the expense of pairing accuracy with output, and I'm trying not to go too fast here because this is a really, really, really important thing. You can have kids that are successful in everything that means, air quotes intended, about kind of achieving the competitive task, but they're doing so in a way that patterns mechanics that make them less and less viable for like what competitive output looks like over time. Yeah. But in the current term, you're not getting any signal there.
Yeah, that's where you see the guy at 11, the kid at 11 who's like amazing, and then you never hear about him again once everyone else hits puberty.
Right. And to me that hurts my heart, because when I think about that kid, that little boy or girl, they don't know any different. Yeah. Right? They are trying to appease the coaches that they have. They want to make their parents proud. They don't want to be embarrassed in front of their teammates, right? Like they're trying to do their best in the way that they understand that. But the problem is that once you pattern in very non-ideal mechanics, that's a tough hole to dig out of, yeah. Right? Like it's a really, really tough one. The trickier thing is to go like, all right, well, I understand that both things are important. I need to be able to throw some level of competitive intent relative to kind of my output capacity, but I also want that to be competitive, right? Like nobody wants to go out and zoo balls over the backstop, yeah. And hit batters and walk the house and then go like, I'm throwing hard. Like nobody's going to feel good about that. Specifically the kid. The kid is definitely not going to feel good about that. Sure. So what you need is a parent or a coach, and oftentimes the parent is the coach, into that ecosystem to kind of coach a kid through these stages of movement discovery, where it is, okay, are we trying to throw the ball hard? Yes. Okay, do our mechanics kind of resemble that? Are we seeing like a good amount of proximal to distal in terms of like the big segments, the proximal, the distal, the small ones? Are we seeing like this full body kinetic sequence that we want, that we understand is the path towards ideal movement?
Yeah.
Or are we seeing the other thing, which is I'm 10 years old and I'm on the mound and I tried to throw a strike and I didn't, and my dad yelled at me, throw strikes.
Yeah, this is so funny. This is 2 games ago. My son's team, they were playing another team. He was a little heavier set kid. no lower body drive, no stride, like no hip bump, nothing. It was all arm, but he's a big kid, so he had some velocity on it relative to everyone else, right? And you could tell he's like their, ace, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, this kid is screwed in the next 3 years. So I literally went up to the dad after. I was like, hey man, like I'm not in the baseball world, but you may want to look at maybe getting him to use his lower body a little more strength. Like his arm is going to be torn up. And his dad looked at me like I had 3 heads, and I was like,
of course.
Yeah, I was like, I gave him. I was like, there's a couple companies you can look at. You were one of the ones I gave. I was like, just go look at someone. I was like, I don't care which one you go to. I was like, there's a couple other companies out there, and I was like, you just try one.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like we'll talk about, I'll do like baseball specific podcasts, and sometimes I get asked this question like, well, what would you differently about like T-ball or coach pitch? And it's like, well, T-ball, just don't play a 3-up, 3-down baseball game. Please, for the love of God, don't do that.
Yeah.
We are very much like front loading the technical execution of the game in a period of time when these kids just need to learn the skill.
Right.
And not only do they need to learn the skill, but they need to be engaged with the act of skill acquisition.
Yeah.
What does that mean in simple terms? Make it more fun.
Yeah, they got to have fun. Yeah. Number one reason why kids stop playing is because it's not fun.
So why do we have kids playing in the outfield in a T-ball game? What are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like what are we doing? I've coached those kids. I'm not looking down my nose.
Yeah.
I literally lived that life for between my son and my daughter at least 2 years of coaching T-ball, and I did the same thing. It was horrific, and I know better now.
Yeah.
So I don't think T-ball should look like a game of baseball. I think it should have, call it 3 to 4 stations, a hitting station, a fielding station for grounders, a fielding station for fly balls with like tennis balls or something nice and soft, and a throwing station. But that throwing station, I don't think they should be throwing to a person. I think they should be throwing to a target.
Yeah. Because
you have to understand, if you like go watch a T-ball practice, right?
Yeah.
Like go watch one of those practices, and put these kids on a line and they're trying to throw to each other, and inherently, these little 4-year-old kids understand that like they want to accomplish the task. And that means they want to. So they've got a kid. They've got a catch partner who's just like, this is my glove. Yeah. And they're like, I'm going to get it right there. And
failure is missing. And if you're not failing, you want to be. Correct me if I'm wrong. From what I've seen, a skill acquisition standpoint, 70% success is kind of where you want to be. Like you want to, right?
Sure.
So you want I want the kid throwing hard enough where he misses the target 3 out of every 10. If he's hitting it all 10 times, he's probably not working. He's not going to be increasing velocity.
Correct. And I think when you think about this, the way that it plays out for the kid, there is inherent understanding on both sides. They inherently understand that if they have a child that's a catch partner, that they don't want to be embarrassed, right? Like the moment that they just like zoo a ball over their catch partner's head, then that kid has to go chase it down, and that's another 30 to 45 seconds. Yeah. Then they're just kind of like standing there, and they have that 30, 45 seconds to feel incompetent in so much as that's a thing that they can understand. But if you just – this is what I did when I was an older and smarter coach. By the time that I was coaching majors with my son, and I was much less of an idiot than I was when I started coaching, still kind of an idiot, I went to the dollar store and got a bunch of hula hoops, and we would zip tie those things on a fence. And if I needed to throw bullpens, like for my team, I would have like 2 hula hoop zone targets. They're approximately where the strike zone was, and then another kid working off the mound. And I would have them cycle through those things. But the kids that are throwing just into the hula hoop, it's just a points-based game. Yeah. How many times did you throw the ball inside the hula hoop out of a set of 8, right? Yeah. And shoot, man, to that 70% ratio, if we're landing somewhere between like 5 to 6 strikes, I'm happy as a clam. Yeah. I'm absolutely thrilled. And when you approach it from that kind of gamified point-based system, you're also giving that child a target to move towards. So if I've got a kid, I mean, look, I had this kid when when my son was 11, I had him. This kid was named Robbie. Robbie was, again, like physiologically advanced, threw really hard. And I did not, as a coach for him, do a good enough job of helping him kind of understand how to control the output level that he had.
Yeah.
But if I had to do it all over again, what I would do is I would have Robbie set up like that hula hoop target on the defense would be his best friend,
Yeah.
and we would go, Robbie, like, all right, show me 8 pitches in the zone at 70% intent. Oh, we did that like 7 times out of 8. Cool. Let's go to 80% intent. Okay, we did that 6 times out of 8. Okay, cool. Let's go to 90%. And he goes 3 out of 8. Okay, Robbo, here's what we're going to do. I want you to shoot for 85%, and let's see if we can get 5 to 6 out of those 8.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of existing research about like the difference between RPE or rate of perceived exertion and actual output isn't like really mapped to 1-to-1. Those studies, if I remember correctly, typically involve adults, not children. So assume that like kids are even worse at that.
Yeah.
But the only thing I'm trying to do is that like somewhere in there, I want him to find a feel for a decently competitive level of intent at a competitive percentage of hit rate.
Yeah.
And all that stuff is very different than what we first started talking about was the lesson, right?
Yep.
The lesson is just like, if there isn't a radar gun involved, then if I have a kid harvest a bunch of output, but they throw more strikes, I mean, it's an experience in a vacuum. You know, like there's no signal there. There's no batter in the box. Nobody's telling you that like, hey, that that middle 60% output pitch is going to get rocked.
Yeah.
You're not getting any signal there. So for us, in terms of like I realize it's a very roundabout way to get into this subject, but like the way that we try to approach skill development is to have the training environments be relevant to what competition looks like. What that means is we generally do little to no hitting off of a tee. That doesn't mean that the tee doesn't have its place. We'll have the kids, some of them do tee work to warm up. That's a thing that they want to do, mostly at the high school level. But beyond that, we're not really going to do a lot of tee work.
Yeah.
Same thing on the throwing side. It's just like, we do have a system now that we rolled out called intended zones. Intended zones allows us to basically quantify command, where there's an app and there's a projector that kind of puts up what we call a 9 pocket, right?
Okay,
so it's the 9. It's a strike zone divided into 9.
Yeah.
Player indicates on the screen, they click the pitch they want to throw, they click the direction or the place in the 9 pocket they want to throw it, they throw the pitch. TrackMan then calculates the difference between where they intended to throw it versus where it actually landed, and now we can quantify command in a meaningful way, and actually figure out like a training environment that allows you to train both of those things.
Yeah.
How do we train command, but doing it in a way that doesn't have you just like reduce a ton of degrees of freedom and harvest a bunch of output?
Yeah,
because ultimately at the end of the day, the job is to get outs. But at the youth level, there's a bunch of different ways to get outs, mostly because the hitters are not very good.
Yeah.
But
I saw one last night. If the coach yells really, really loud that the runner left the base before the ball crossed the plate, that's an out. I saw that one. He had to do it 3 times. None of times which the kid left early, but he intimidated the umpire enough that was apparently the way to get an out. I learned last night.
Yeah, well, as we all know, the higher the volume,
Yes,
the more
exactly.
veracity of what's being said, right?
Yeah, exactly. But and I am curious, Deven, on the training side, when you guys are getting these little leagues, so 8, 9, 10, kind of like that age group, and then obviously they age up through into high school and beyond. How much are you looking at in the weight room, in the versus mobility, tissue work, lifting weights? Obviously you've talked a bit about the speed training and the technicals and obviously outcome based, the game based systems to help them figure out with RPE. What about in the physical space? What are you guys kind of doing there?
So for us, whether it's what we would call like our long-term athletic development games or LTAD games for kind of like the 12 and under kids, or it's the 13s and 14s that are starting to get introduced to some amount of external load, whether that's kettlebells or landmine presses or anything like that, or any other type of movements that prime them for ultimately getting under a barbell.
Yep.
We aren't going to do any type of youth training that doesn't involve both the sport specific skill and the athletic
I
development.
love that.
Like
Yeah.
full stop. That's
Yeah.
just not a thing that we do. So we have products like we just launched Driveline camps, which are just like in-person training camps for kids to come in that are 14 and under. But they're going to do some throwing, they're going to do some hitting, and they're going to do some athletic development
Love that.
because for me, it's just it has to be holistic, right? Like it has to be holistic. It doesn't mean that if we had a 2 hour group, right? If we had a 2 hour training session, I would love to have them hit for 2 hours, right? Absent everything else. However, there's a couple things I know that's going to happen. One, most kids are going to start like their attention is going to start to wane,
100%.
and the more that the level of engagement goes down, the rate of skill acquisition is going to go down, right? Because what they call the arousal rate in the brain, or basically the way that the brain is paying attention to these minor variations in technique, movement, all these different type of adaptations that are taking place, they get less engaged. That's going to happen. Number two, fatigue. So output is just going to go down naturally. But number three, if all we do is hit, we're working a lot of like the accelerators, right?
Yeah.
Like it's all the stuff that helps us kind of like rotate. What signal are we getting in that environment to train the deceleration phase of the swing, other than just kind of like what you're naturally doing? Well, if we understand that you have to do both, if we understand that generally you're only going to be able to rotate and accelerate as fast as you can decelerate,
Yeah.
and that when you start to be able to accelerate faster than you can decelerate, bad things can possibly happen. I got to address that side too.
Yeah.
So we have to have time not only to train the sport-specific skills of hitting and throwing, but we also have to do them or have the kids play a game like medicine ball volleyball, where every time that they catch a medicine ball, I'm receiving it, right? I'm training those decelerators, and then I have to throw it back over the net. Now I'm training the accelerators. But if I'm doing that in an engaging format, that's like making those kids have fun, they don't even think that they're doing strength training. We are getting like the holistic developmental improvement that we need that increases the rate of development on the sport specific skill. But you just have to be able to do all that stuff, and whether that's our camps, which is just like a 1 week short experience thing, whether it's Driveline Flex, which is for kids who want to train with Driveline but they don't want to leave their current team, or whether it's with our teams, which is the ultimate expression of what we can do on the development side because it grants us control of the schedule for a full season.
Yeah.
All of those products involve not only the sport specific but the general athletic because they have to.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of leads to my last question, is I obviously want to be respectful of your time. When you open your spot in Raleigh in North Carolina, because my son needs one. But in all seriousness, everything that you're describing it's literally you could just substitute golf the principles are exactly the same. The rotational elements, gamification of it, the way that acquisition is learned, all the same challenges that you guys are having in baseball, and that you guys are amazingly working through, you in particular on the junior side. Same stuff that we face in golf, the early specialization, the just taking lessons and just keep it in the fairway, as opposed to like, let's actually work on some speed. And
Yeah.
you're not going to play on tour swinging 105 miles an hour. Like you got to go more than that. But for people who want to get involved with Driveline, programs or learn more about you guys, for their kids, because a lot of our golfers play baseball. There's I have siblings who play baseball. So, what are some ways that people can get involved? I know you mentioned the one program where they can actually stay with the current team they're with. I thought that was really, really intelligent to do.
Yeah, so we got a couple of things, man, and I think the number one thing that I would say is just like a lot of this information is out there for free, and we put a lot out for free, just because that's how I got started with Driveline. Like before I worked at Driveline, I was actually a customer. I had been subscribed to the Sunday email, the Sunday Thunder Nuggets, if you will. I had been reading the blog, and then I took my son down to an off-season training camp in January of 2018, when he was right about to turn 9. And the reason that I made that leap was because I'd engaged with all the free stuff beforehand.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say that like there's a number of the stuff that you can just kind of find out there, either on our socials or on the blog or free training programs we put out. You can do that stuff. We have some other stuff that you can do. Driveline Academy Flex is basically that product that just because you guys are in North Carolina, we could actually get you started on Flex now. And that doesn't, the best case scenario would be that if you came down to one of our facilities and started with a snapshot assessment, which is part of that Flex program.
Oh, cool.
But even if you,
so it's basically
even
like an
if you,
in-person experience in the remote environment.
yeah,
I love that.
yeah, it's kind of the ultimate application of Flex is kind of like this hybrid online in-person type of deal. Where between coming into the facility and leveraging some of the tech and systems that we have, but then doing some remote work with some tools we can give you that allows us to still get data to track development. That's kind of the way that Flex works. It's really easy for us to go like, all right, well, if you've got golf lessons, right? If we got golf practice or whatever you would call it on. I don't know, Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, right? Whatever's a reasonable cadence. Hey, we'll work on baseball stuff Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? And we'll program that out. You'll work with a trainer. They'll look at your assessment data. They will give you a program. They'll modify that program based on the inputs you can give us remotely. Because again, a lot of the tools we use in-house are now getting to the point where we can kind of democratize and distribute them remotely, right?
Yeah, that's what we've done. Yeah.
Yeah,
Smart.
you can. If you had a HitTrax in your house, that's great. It's that's wonderful. It's you can talk to my guy Andrew Barry at HitTrax. He's the man. Andrew will set you up with a HitTrax in home. It's not cheap. I'm crazy enough to be considering putting one in my house, but
awesome.
it's not cheap. But if you don't have access to that, well, with the blast sensor, we can still get all the metrics about the swing.
Right. Yep.
And if you understand, thanks to the work of Dr. Alan Nathan, who basically proved in terms of physics that for every mile an hour of bat speed you produce, you generate 1.2 miles an hour of exit velocity. And the thing that we were told back in the day, which is the pitcher supplies the power, therefore you don't need to swing fast. Well, that's just wrong.
Yep.
That's not true. We can know that we're getting better in terms of bat speed development just by with the blast sensor and even not have you being in a facility, right? Same thing with either a pocket radar to track throwing ball velocity or even the Driveline pulse sensor, which is just like a little wearable that goes on the elbow. We can track the arm speeds and understand that you are getting better at moving stronger. But all of those products, again, are going to not only include the sport-specific stuff about hitting and throwing, but also the athletic development stuff that you need to do to get the holistic benefit. And again, that's just a conversation like, all right, well, is your kid 11? Well, probably don't need them under a barbell, but let's talk about some progression of body weight exercises we can do that'll help them get better and start to set up those patterns that we need for later. So Driveline Academy Flex is a great way. I think it's the best way for people to engage with what we're doing on the youth side, unless you're close enough to a facility where it's like, hey, then we can get you in, very, very frequently.
Yeah, for sure. Well, sounds like we're gonna have to do Flex until you guys come to Raleigh. So, but
hey, I'm down. We've talked about a concept for like a youth only, like a youth only kind of training in a box type of thing, and I'd love to see that come to fruition. It might take some time, but in the current term, Driveline Academy Flex is the way to start.
That's awesome. Well, Deven, thank you so much for coming on. Just socials, and we'll put everything into the show notes. But just for everyone listening, quick, best place to get in touch with you guys.
Yeah, so you can find us on Driveline Youth on X and Twitter, because I'm always going to call it Twitter because I'm an old head. Driveline Youth on X and on Instagram and on Facebook and sometimes on TikTok. And then you can always find me. It's Deven Morgan with 2 E's, and I'm decently active on Twitter. I've been active in that space for a long time, and at this point, it's kind of just populated mostly by baseball coaches and angry old dads. But like that's fine. Those are my people. I'm a card-carrying angry old dad, so I'm one of them.
Absolutely love it. Cool. Well, Deven, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate you. I know you're super busy, and actually, it was a blast to get to nerd out a bit and all this stuff with you, and we'll definitely want to have you on again sometime soon.
Absolutely, man. It was great to be on here. It was a great combo.
Awesome. Hey, everybody, thanks for hanging out with us today here on the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad, and we'll look forward to catching you on the next episode.